Carlton Montgomery is standing beside me. He was nice enough to come and speak this morning. Jim Rosenthal was nice enough a year ago, to suggest that we have Carlton here. So I'm going to read a short bio. Carlton Montgomery is Executive Director of the Pinelands Preservation Alliance, a position he has held since 1998. After receiving his law degree from Harvard Law School and clerking on the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, Carlton joined the law firm of Fried, Frank, Harris, Shriver, and Jacobson, where he became a partner in the firm's litigation practice in 1994. Looking to devote his energy and training to the environmental movement, Carlton had the good fortune to find the Pinelands and the PPA. Over the past 2 decades, he has helped PPA expand its advocacy, communications, and constituency building to ensure New Jersey's extraordinary growth management system succeeds in saving the unique resources of the Pinelands in America's most crowded state. In recent years, PPA has created Pinelands Adventures and Rancocas Creek Farm. Pinelands Adventures is an outfitter that helps thousands of people each year learn to love the Pinelands through canoe and kayak trips, land-based explorations, and programs for schools and service organizations. Rancocas Creek Farm is a chemical-free, regenerative farm that demonstrates the value of good working lands management for protecting water, restoring soil health, providing healthy food, and strengthening the local farm economy. Through its involvement in the Inclusive Healthy Communities Initiative, PPA and its partners seek to make the Pinelands a valued resource for all people through expanding information and opportunities for persons with disabilities to enjoy natural places. Carlton serves on the Board of Trustees of the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. Welcome, Carlton.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. Is this loud enough? All right, good. So first, just want to ask, how many of you have never explored in the Pine Barrens? Okay, so that's some. Most of you have done something in the Pinelands, so some of this may be familiar. But what I want to do is talk about how the idea of a large regional state-sponsored conservation program came about, what the idea behind it is, how it actually works in practice, and what my organization, the Pinelands Preservation Alliance, does in partnership with other organizations, like the Friends of the Black Run that Jim Rosenthal is so deeply involved in. What we do to try to make that conservation program work for everybody. So first off, I just want to give a flavor for those who have not yet explored in the Pine Barrens, what it looks like and how beautiful and wonderful it is. So we have forests. The Pine Plains are the so-called pygmy pine forest you may have driven through on your way to Long Beach Island, or down, if you go through Warren Grove, you pass through these very unusual plateaus of very short trees. Atlantic white cedar swamps are one of the kind of iconic settings in the Pine Barrens, sometimes referred to as the cathedrals of the pines because of the way light filters through, somewhat like in a cathedral with stained glass. There are streams and lakes, wetlands that are biologically the richest areas in the Pine Barrens, savannas with rare plants growing in them. These are kind of wet meadows along streams. And the estuaries. It's important to remember that if you like Barnegat Bay, for example, you got to love the Pine Barrens, because the water that keeps Barnegat Bay healthy is coming out of the Pinelands, flowing underground and downstreams into the estuaries. That's the freshwater element. And so the estuaries are also part of the Pinelands. And thinking about the Pinelands, one way to think of it is a kind of Noah's Ark, that it is a safe haven, relatively safe haven, surrounded by turbulent seas because of the ecology and the law. On the ecology side, The outer coastal plain of New Jersey, which is pretty much the Pinelands, about almost a quarter of the state of New Jersey. It's basically one big wedge of sand, right? When you go out into the woods around, starting in, say, Medford, Evesham area, going east, the soil is very sandy. That means it's droughty, it's acidic, it's low in nutrients. Hence the term pine barrens for those who wanted to grow crops like corn. It's not very good at that, where the soil is so sandy and acidic. But the water also becomes acidic. The result is that only species that are adapted to those conditions can survive. And as a result, unlike all the temperate forests around us, the pine barrens has not been ecologically affected by invasive species. It really is a home for the native species that are adapted there because other species, like many of those invasives that have come through trade from Asia, for example, just can't prosper in the pine barrens. So it's really quite an extraordinary arc of biodiversity. And then the law, which I'm going to talk about also, that protects so much of the pinelands from being developed in suburban sprawl type development. These two things together have made the pine barrens a home, a real refuge for a piece of creation. And these two species are examples of that. I'm not going to get this. There. Up here, this is a field, this is a savanna covered in bog asphodel, a very beautiful yellow flower. This is a flower that was once found up and down the East Coast in swamps, in coastal bogs and swamps. It is now completely wiped out throughout its range on Earth, except in the pine barrens, where it's actually quite abundant. So this is an interesting idea that there's a place in New Jersey where you can find the last refuge of a species because it has been protected in, as we heard, as in the nation's most crowded state. And then this is a pine barrens tree frog, which is an iconic species for us. It's a tiny little tree frog that is found in the pine barrens quite abundantly, but has been wiped out almost everywhere else. There are two populations left, one in the panhandle of Florida and a very small one in North Carolina. But otherwise, it has lost its habitats everywhere except in the pine barrens, where again, it is still abundant. So, there are species, and more of them over time, I think we're going to find, that you can only find in New Jersey's pinelands. So there's lots of beautiful flowers for those of you who like botany and botanical heritage. White-fringed orchid and grass pink are two of the most easily found but very beautiful orchids. Swamp pink, this is actually a federally listed threatened species, so it's also recognized as having become extremely rare due to human alteration of its habitats. It's a spectacularly beautiful lily. All of those little petals make up this one flower, and it's really quite beautiful, and it's very rare except in the pinelands, where there are a number of places that you can find it. We have carnivorous plants. I focus on botany because to some extent the plants are what is most distinctive about the pinelands due to the soils and the water. We have pitcher plants. Those are the plants that trap insects in the pitcher, which fills with water. Insects get trapped, they can't get out due to the construction of little hairs that point down inside those pitchers. They get trapped and they are slowly dissolved by enzymes that the pitcher creates. And then sundews capture insects with a sticky little, you can kind of see the, whoops. You can see the, that went fast. These little globules. And those are adaptations to low nutrient conditions where plants can supplement their diet, their normal plant diets, with actual insects. So these are very distinctive features of the ecology of the pine barrens. So what exactly is the pinelands? Pine barrens being the ecology, the thing that creation gave us. Pinelands is a human creation by statute. So start with New Jersey. Then we add in all of the municipal boundaries. Can you believe that? New Jersey is broken up into 600 and some municipalities. Each one of them traditionally has authority over land use, what gets developed and where it gets developed. So here in Cherry Hill decides, the municipal government decides where land is developed and how it is developed. Well, you can imagine that trying to protect a large area, like this is the aerial extent of the Kirkwood-Cohansey Aquifer. This is water that is embedded in the sands that make up the Pinelands. And think of it like a bucket of sand. You have a bucket of sand, you pour water slowly into it until the water rises to just below the surface. And if you then draw your finger through the sand, water will seep into the little indentation you've made. Well, that is a model of the aquifer, the water embedded in the sand, and of streams. Streams in the Pine Barrens are just the aquifer made visible by depressions in the land where water flows into those depressions and creates a stream. Well, that is the water source for millions of people who live in South Jersey, not here in Cherry Hill, but nearby in places like Evesham and Medford. A portion of their water supply is coming from this aquifer. And then as you go farther east, it becomes, the towns become entirely dependent on this aquifer system. And that also would be true of the whole tourism industry. So, if you're going to protect this aquifer that is obviously very vulnerable to what happens on the surface, since the water is right below the surface, you have to think about looking at things on a regional basis. If every one of these towns, whoops, I keep hitting the wrong button, I'm sorry about that. If every one of these, several dozen towns is deciding what happens on the surface of the land, given its own priorities on a given day, given whose cousin is a developer and a politician, given the changes that take place in political priorities and ideas of what's good for the town, there is absolutely no way you could protect a body of water of that magnitude, doing it on a municipal basis. Too fragmented, too many priorities, too many changing priorities, and too much politics. And then the green here is the extent of the Pine Barrens ecosystem. That's that very acidic, low nutrient ecology that I talked about. Once again, if you want to protect that ecosystem, you can't rely on municipal governments, all those fragmented governments. One of them will do something that contradicts the priorities of another, and vice versa. It is a prescription for sprawl. It is what we see, of course, emanating out from Philadelphia on both sides of the river, if you were to rely on municipal governments to make these decisions. So, in 1978, the federal government passed a statute as part of the National Parks and Recreation Act, and it was followed by a complementary statute in the state of New Jersey in 1979, the Pinelands Protection Act, created this boundary, this red boundary here, somewhat arbitrary by today's standards. There's bits of politics involved in it, but you can see that it encompasses a really large area. That's 1.1 million acres. Again, almost a quarter of the state of New Jersey is inside that boundary. And inside that boundary, the idea is to plan development and conservation on a really large scale. And this is the resulting so-called Comprehensive Management Plan, or CMP. This is like a giant zoning map. I'm sure many of you have seen a zoning map from your own towns. The different colors represent what you're allowed to build or not to do in each of those zones. And this is on a regional scale. So we have Atlantic City down here. This is Olga's Circle right here, so we're over here somewhere, I guess. This is the Fort Dix, McGuire, Lakehurst Joint Military Base up here. And if you know Chatsworth, the village of Chatsworth, it's right there in the middle. So this map shows what you can and can't do. It has fairly arbitrary boundaries, as I said, by today's sort of environmental standards, but it covers a really big area, and that's really the key. It provides for growth and conservation. So these brighter colors, these are growth areas. Like I say, this is Marlton right here. This is Egg Harbor Township in Hamilton down here. Here is the sort of Route 9 corridor. It provided for development within existing villages and towns with growth boundaries added to them, plus a lot of development outside of Atlantic City, because you may remember that when this program came into effect in 1979 and 1980 was also when casino gambling was approved for Atlantic City, and there was this idea there's going to be this huge boom. And so the politicians provided for a lot of development outside of Atlantic City in Hamilton, Egg Harbor Township, and pretty much those two towns, as well as these areas that were left out of the Pinelands. So you then have, these are the growth areas. These bright colors that's like Hamilton, established towns. That's Egg Harbor City. This is Woodbine down here, and up here we have Whiting. So, you know, they were provisioned for growth in those established villages with growth boundaries on them, and in these growth areas that were around the edges. But 2/3 of this whole area was set aside for conservation, and that's the greens. The lighter green is called the protection area, and it has quite stringent regulations on development. And the darker green and this sort of bluish green are the preservation area, and they have extremely stringent rules. So in this whole area of several 100,000 acres, you cannot build anything unless you can expand an existing home, or you can build, if you're in this lighter green area, which is really the cranberry zone, you can build a farm barn, for example, like a building that is related to an active farming operation. But I could go and buy 100,000 acres of land, and there's a couple of places where you could actually do that almost. I could not build a house there. So it's very, very stringent. The only people who could build something new would be a family that actually owned that land in direct descent in 1980 when the rules went into effect. The idea being anyone who buys in after these rules are put in place has nothing to complain about that the rules are there. So it's very stringent. And this is really the heart of the Pine Barrens here. Like I said, that's the village of Chatsworth, where there is some development with a boundary around it. And then occasionally, of course, you'll see buildings like houses that predate these rules. So nobody was displaced from their homes or their businesses by these rules. They accepted all existing development, but then heavily restricted future development. And that's the whole concept here. Like I say, it is a very large area, and the idea here was that the amount of growth that is allowed is compatible with saving the ecosystem. So you're not going to save every single habitat that existed, every piece of forest. There's some growth taking place, some subdivisions, some malls being built, but overall, enough is protected forever that the wildlife species, the plants, and the water, the aquifer, will survive. And then, these are boundaries, they're hard boundaries, they're set by law. It is the law of the land. And every local ordinance has to comply with the regional plan. So the local zoning ordinances will have more details sometimes, but those details have to be approved and certified by the state of New Jersey's Pinelands Commission as being compliant with this plan. And that means that any municipal ordinance that conflicts with the plan is of no legal effect. And that was really critical, because if you had a plan and you didn't make it mandatory on municipal governments, it would never have worked. And then this is what things look like. This is a map of land use as of 1997, I think it is. So it's a little out of date, but it's published by the state of New Jersey. It shows you in red urban and suburban development. There's a brown color you can kind of see here, that's upland farming, like potatoes, tomatoes, zucchini, and so on. Green is forest, and the light blue is wetlands. Dark blue is obviously open water. And then this yellow line here is the Pinelands boundary, the political boundary where the rules are in effect. So you can see there's a big difference between inside and outside of that boundary. And I would suggest to you that based on experience in New Jersey, if it had not been for that boundary, if it hadn't been for those rules, this would look nothing like it does today. You know, you would have this is Hamilton, so that was an pre-existing town. This is, you know, the area outside of Atlantic City. That kind of sprawl would be found scattered throughout the Pinelands if it had not been for these rules. Because one of the key things is that these rules apply whether the land is publicly owned or privately owned. So while there is now a great deal of public land, half of that public land, places like Wharton State Forest and Brendan T. Burns State Forest, half of that public land was acquired and made public after these rules were put into effect. So you really have to think about what it would look like if it hadn't been for that law. And I submit we wouldn't have anything like the Pinelands we have today, but for these rules. So there's the aquifer I was mentioning. Here people are using a hand pump to pump from a shallow well at Goshen Pond in Wharton State Forest. And as I mentioned, this is a stream at a place called Friendship. I know it's here somewhere. That runs through the Pinelands. That is really just the aquifer that you can see because of the lay of the land. There's also a really interesting point that I think is not well recognized, that the water from the Pine Barrens, from the Kirkwood-Cohansey aquifer, doesn't just flow out to the east, to the shore. A chunk of it flows into the Delaware River in the Rancocas Creek watershed. And that water flows into the Delaware just upstream of the water intakes of the City of Philadelphia Water Company and New Jersey American on the New Jersey side. That water is cleaner than the water that is flowing from the north, so it improves the water quality, and it accounts for 10 to 12% of the volume of water that is taken by the water companies on both sides. So if you're in downtown Philadelphia, you go to a restaurant, they pour you tap water, a piece of that is coming out of the Pine Barrens because of the way the water flows from the aquifer to the west into the Delaware. There are still a lot of threats, though. So there is a legal regime that is supposed to solve all the problems, but of course that's never the case, not in politics and economics. One of the biggest issues is illegal off-roading, where people use monster trucks, ATVs, motorcycles. They like to drive in wetlands and streams and tear up roads. If you ever drive on the sand roads in places like Wharton State Forest, it's hard to avoid places where you cannot pass because people in trucks have done what they call mudding, where they tear up they go into a puddle and they tear it up, and it's really fun because they get all muddy. It's illegal, but it happens rampantly, and there are whole stretches of our public lands that have essentially been ceded by the state of New Jersey to renegades, where we have not put in the resources or had the political will to actually have park rangers able to take care of our public lands. It's a real tragedy. We have just started a campaign called Fix Our Parks, which is really a statewide effort to try to get the state of New Jersey to recognize the enormous value of these vast public lands that we've put billions and billions of dollars into protecting. Now we need to actually make them usable by responsible, low-impact users, and also protect those resources from this kind of damage. There's always the threat of sprawl, right? There's money to be made. People will be trying to break down those boundaries and develop areas that should not be developed. These are both pictures from inside the Pinelands boundary. This is in Ocean County in the top right, and Atlantic County development, I think it is, on the lower left. There's constant efforts to develop land inside the Pinelands. Fortunately, because of the regulatory hurdles, for the most part, developers hire the right lawyers, the right engineers, the right planners, and try to do things according to the rules. That is, build in the right places in the growth areas rather than conservation areas, and follow the special rules that are built around trying to protect the aquifer through better stormwater management and development design. But not everybody falls into that category. And over time, as you may have noticed, if you've been anywhere to the east of here, there's a huge building boom going on right now. and in northern, I guess, mid-Burlington County. Enormous warehouses going up, and also new housing developments. It's been quiet since 2008, the Great Recession of 2008. Right now, construction is booming. Eventually, we're going to build all the land that is available, not protected by the pinelands, not protected by farmland, conservation easements, and so on. And then the pressure will be even greater to break down those boundaries. What we do is we try to build an active constituency of people who care about this place, think it's cool, and demand that politicians do right by the pinelands. We go to a lot of public meetings. We participate in protests where necessary. This had to do with the South Jersey gas pipeline project you may have heard about several years ago. It was one of our victories in that pipeline was defeated. It was a natural gas pipeline right through the forest area of the Pinelands for absolutely no legitimate purpose. There was also a New Jersey natural gas pipeline in the northern part of the Pinelands, which was successful. We were unable to defeat that one. But we try to get people involved. And this here is, anyone recognize him? Tom Kean, former governor. Tom Kean is a Republican former governor, a great hero on environmental topics in New Jersey and particularly of the Pinelands. He was here giving a talk in support of our efforts. And he really reflects the fact that at least until Chris Christie came along, protecting the Pinelands was a bipartisan project. Governor Brendan Byrne was the governor who was the real father of the Pinelands, a Democrat. He was followed in office by Tom Kean, who tells the story that shortly after taking office, a bunch of South Jersey legislators came to him and said, okay, now we can undo that Pinelands thing, right? Because you're a Republican. Brendan Byrne was a Democrat. You wouldn't want to keep something he had done. And he told them, you can try, but I'll veto it and you'll fail. They went away, and there was not a real effort during his time to try to undo the Pinelands program. So he's a great advocate for the Pinelands and a hero of ours. We like to remind public officials of their duties. This was a huge public meeting. There were 1,000 people in this room, according to the hotel. It was actually at the Crown Plaza, I think it's called, on Route 70. Is that in Cherry Hill? Yeah. Huge ballroom there. Absolutely packed with people opposed to the South Jersey gas pipeline. And then we file appeals. Sometimes when we feel government has done the wrong thing and we can try to appeal it. In the case of the South Jersey gas case, we did actually win an appeal, which is amazing. I have to say, I have virtually no respect for the court system in New Jersey. I feel it is wholly politicized and deferential to whoever the executive in office is. It doesn't do its job. And so it was kind of remarkable to win any case at all in the courts in New Jersey for the environment. But we do that. That's a lot of what we do is advocacy. But we also believe that people will not care about a place unless they learn to love it through personal experience. So we created Pinelands Adventures. We do canoe and kayak trips, but also walking trips and some driving tours of natural and historic sites. And we do, the principle behind this, we created the operation in 2015. And the way we pitched the idea to the foundations and individuals who made it possible through their donations was that we would run trips and charge members of the public to take them canoeing and kayaking and so on. And with that, we would build the capacity so that we could offer guided tours to schools and community service organizations for whatever they could afford. And many pay nothing at all. If they have it in their budget, like some school districts do, they'll pay towards the trip, but it's whatever they can afford. And that's allowed us to take several thousand young people before the pandemic out on really high impact trips in the Pine Barrens. And now we're trying to build that up again after the pandemic really shut down field trips for schools and so on. We believe that the Pinelands should be for everyone, but most public lands are not managed very much for people with disabilities in mind. So we launched this project called The Pinelands is for Everyone, and are working to publicize where you can go if, for example, you use a wheelchair. You can learn detailed information about sites that might be good for you, so you can plan a successful trip ahead of time rather than show up and find that it doesn't work. We're beginning to offer, we're going to be in the coming year offering trips for everybody, including people who have mobility issues and parents of children, for example, who have developmental issues, but also for everyone else, trips that are suitable for everybody. And we're going to try to help make those good experiences for families. One of the things that really has struck me as I got involved in this project and launched it for PPA is that everybody is connected with people who have problems getting around, or who have developmental and intellectual disabilities. And yet I think in many cases what we tend to do is not think about doing certain activities because we view that as a barrier, and going out into nature is one of those. We've learned a lot from people with disabilities and from caregivers about what those obstacles are, and we're really trying to help them overcome those barriers so that everyone can enjoy the physical and the mental and the spiritual benefits of being out in nature. And I want to leave you with this. This is a totally typical Pine Barrens scene. Very beautiful, very inviting. It's the kind of place that we like to take people for a walk, the kind of place we like to go ourselves to enjoy. It's readily available to all of you. You're not far away. And I hope that you will take advantage of it. You also have really close by the Black Run Preserve. Like I say, that's where Jim is so involved. It's absolutely gorgeous place in Evesham. It's a municipal park, but it's really volunteers, the volunteer group that Jim's part of, that has made it accessible and comfortable for visitors with trail maps and signs and taking care of the place. It's a wonderful example of a Pine Barrens setting that is right at the edge of the Pine Barrens and very close to you here. I also hope that you will consider getting involved in one way or another, supporting my organization, the Pinelands Preservation Alliance, or other activities like the Friends of the Black Run, and other organizations that are involved in trying to protect the Pinelands. And I have some literature that I gave to David at that you can pick up if you want to take a look at any of these things, postcards and newsletters and things. And I hope you'll consider doing that. I also hope, if we have time, that people might have some questions or observations or war stories to tell. Yes, sir.
Can you give us an update on the aftermath of the fire last Sunday?
Oh, yeah, sure.
How extensive was the damage? When can you go back?
Yeah. So last Sunday morning, we were, our Pinelands Adventures team had put people in the river, on the Mullica River, who then called in and said, there's a lot of smoke out here. We reported it to the state. It turned out there was, in fact, a fire that had started at an illegal campsite. The Pine Barrens, because of its ecology, is a fire-adapted ecosystem. That also means it's very vulnerable to fire, especially where there's been wind that dries things out. So it was a high fire risk. For that reason, the state in Wharton State Forest and other public lands only allows campfires and camping in designated places. Well, some idiot was out there camping on their own and started a fire. That fire burned something over 13,500 acres of land, forest. Now, I got to tell you, because of the fact that the State Forest Fire Service was able to defend the structures in its way, and there weren't very many, but there were some, like at the Paradise Campground, because they were able to defend those structures, no structures were damaged, nobody was hurt. Luckily, all the firefighters were fine. And the forest is going to bounce back. Ecologically, it's fine. It's not a problem. Ecologically, it's fine. Business-wise, it was terrible for us because it shut down Pinelands Adventures for a full week. And in fact, they said we might be able to open today, but I don't know if they've given a final answer on that. So that fire has been contained. It is being, it's pretty much out pretty soon. But it's a big one. That's a big one by our standards. It all started by somebody being stupid.
And how long will it take for a remediator to throw new trees and stuff in that area?
Can you say that again?
How long will it remediate to grow trees and such in that area to burn down?
Well, it bounces back really fast. So in a fire like that one, that is not controlled, it's not a prescribed fire, you're going to see a mosaic impact where some areas will be really hot and burn really hot. And if you go there today, you will see just ash. You'll see trees where all the pine needles, all of the leaves have been incinerated, and the whole ground will just look like a nuclear devastation. Come back in a few weeks, you'll see green. Many of those trees will survive because they are adapted to those fire conditions, especially pitch pine is highly adapted to fire. And it has the extraordinary ability to sprout both from its roots and from its trunk of the tree. So it's really incredible, because if you go out there in like I say, just a couple of weeks, you'll have this tree trunk the tree looks absolutely dead except for this bright green life just coming out of it. It's really cool. So you'll start to see that very quickly. But it won't look the same for quite a while. It will probably be years before it looks the way it did before the fire, because a lot of the shrub growth, a lot of the things that grow in the understory and the midstory will have been knocked back, and the trees will take some time. Some of the trees will die, but others will survive. Ecologically, fire is renewal in the Pine Barrens. So it's not like it destroys the forest in any way. It's just, of course, the risk to people that we worry about. Yeah?
Yeah, I was wondering, we hear a lot about saltwater intrusion.
Yep.
The seas are rising. I would think there's been some impact to the pinelands on that, or have they been able to?
Yes, that is one of these issues that is so difficult because it's so gradual. What you're talking about is this. So think about that bucket of sand, right, that I talked about. That's the aquifer. That is fresh water that comes from precipitation, from rain and snow. It creates a barrier which is out to sea off the Atlantic coast, off of our Atlantic coast. On the other side of that barrier, in the sand and the soil underwater, is salt water that's pushing up against it. So there's a boundary between fresh and salt water that has to do with, that moves depending on the amount of pressure coming behind each of those two forces. As we take water out of the aquifers, we then discharge it out to sea in sewer plants, right? That was one of the big things to improve water quality, was take all of our sewer waste and get it out to sea rather than putting it into our streams and lakes. And that had a lot of good ecological effects, except for the fact that it means that all the water we take out of the aquifer is lost to the aquifer. It never goes back. Same with anything that we do to water our lawns. That water is either evaporated or transpired by the plants that take up the water. It's lost to the aquifer. So we're always taking water out, and only nature is putting water back. Well, if we take too much water out, as we have been doing over many decades and increasingly over time, that boundary between the fresh and salt water is moving inland. Slowly, easy to ignore from one year to the next, but eventually it will start to foul wells up and down the coast, as it has in Cape May. Cape May, because of its, the peninsula being so narrow, has actually already, some years ago, had its wells contaminated with salt water, and so they have to do some desalination now to dilute that salt water, that saltier water, in order that it be drinkable. Sea level rise aggravates that by putting more pressure behind the saltwater side of the balance. So it's a long-term big issue. It's one that we have been arguing about for many years. The Pinelands Commission, the state agency that oversees all these programs, is finally looking to adopt some protections that will limit the amount of new and increased withdrawals of fresh water from the aquifer and require that those be balanced with conservation measures so there's no further net loss of water from the system. That's the concept behind some rules that they're going to be announcing pretty soon that we've been advocating for many years. Policy work, if any of you are ever involved in public policy, you may know, almost nothing happens in less than 10 years. And sometimes it takes 20 and 30 years to get things to happen. But that is one of the big issues that we work on, yeah. Somebody back there, you were?
The fact that the ocean reached altitude a billion years ago, and the first dinosaurs found in altitude, is that potential that could happen on the ocean? Could actually further increase the duration destruct the soil?
Well, it is, the reason we have all this sand in the outer coastal plain is because it was all deep underwater at one time. So a combination of sea level falling with the changes in the ice age and so on, with ice packs, and the water, the land had subsided and it rose again. So over many eons we have these sort of beach-like places. How high the water can rise now, that's a very long-term question, and I don't know, because there was a combination of the land rising and falling through geological processes and sea level rising and falling due to ice age processes. So I don't know the answer to, at what point is it possible that this place would be underwater. But our topology, right, our topography is very low. I don't know where we are now, but we're probably, 50 feet above sea level at the most here? And the so-called Forked River Mountains in Ocean County in the Pinelands, a high point is something like 200 feet above sea level. Like that's what counts as a mountain for us. But certainly the sea level rise is already having big impacts along the coast, but also upstream in inland places. Flooding is increasing, partly due to the general level of the water rising during storms. Yeah.
Can you tell us, most of the people here raise their hand that they've never been in Pineland. Could you tell us an easy way to explore like Vasto?
Yeah. So easy ways to explore the Pinelands. And it is true, the Pinelands is not like, say, Yellowstone, where you can go to a park, to one office, one gate, get a map, pay your fee, and explore it in ways that have been sort of determined for you. The Pinelands is a big, sprawling confusion. There are sand roads everywhere because it was, exploited for lumber, for bog iron, for sand over many years before those industries moved on to richer grounds. So it can be confusing. So two things I'd recommend. One is that we produce a map that is designed to help you explore the Pinelands Exploration Map, Pinelands Adventures Map, and that has on it a whole map of the Pinelands. It shows you where the various public lands are and where the main roads are, but also on the back it has profiles of about a dozen sites that are really easy to visit. Among those would be, for example, Batstow Village in Wharton State Forest. Beautiful place. There's a lake, there's an old company town. It was, for some years, the summer getaway for Joseph Wharton, for whom the state forest is named. And it's got trails, including one really nice accessible trail. So that's one place to go. The Black Run Preserve near here is just on Kettle Run Road. If you look that up, you can go to the Friends of the Black Run website and they have the trail map and everything there. That's a great place to visit. That's very close by. Whitespog Village is another great place to go, an old company town where the blueberry was first cultivated for commercial production. And you can go pick blueberries there right now, all over the place. It's in Brendan T. Burns State Forest, and also very easy to explore, very beautiful place. And the last one I'd mention here is the Franklin Parker Preserve is the largest nonprofit managed preserve. It's managed by the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, right in the heart of the Pine Barrens, basically surrounding the village of Chatsworth. It formerly was a DeMarco cranberry farm. Garfield DeMarco, who was a big political heavyweight in his days, he was the main opponent of the whole Pinelands plan when it was being considered. He fought it tooth and nail because of the restrictions it would place on landowners like him. But as the decades went by, and as he needed to retire from the cranberry business, he had no one in the family to leave it to, he actually sold the farm to the New Jersey Conservation Foundation in one of the great conservation actions of the last 15 or 20 years, and they created the Franklin Parker Preserve. It's named for the first chair of the Pinelands Commission. And that is a phenomenal place. It's over 10,000 acres. It's got trails. It's got lots of open land where the cranberry bogs were that are returning to nature. Very beautiful spot, and I highly recommend that as well. But if you want our map, just get in touch with me and I can send you one. Jim?
I would also recommend a couple other places at Zion.
Yep.
Tackle Pond is beautiful in Brendan Seabird State Park. Beautiful place to walk. Is the Forsyth Preserve in the Pinelands?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's another one that's pretty easy to drive.
The Forsyth Reserve is a national wildlife refuge, and it's on the shore, so you see the coastal part of the Pinelands there. At Sign is where we have our Pinelands Adventures program. It's there, and if you want to, you can also just look up Pinelands Adventures online, and there are cards here for Pinelands Adventures, and see what we have to offer. That's a great way to explore the Pinelands as well. Yes, sir?
Are there Native American reservations?
Say again?
Are there Native American reservations?
No. No, one of the very first reservations created in America was the so-called Brotherton Reservation at a place that's now called Indian Mills in Chemung. So it's off Route 206. That shut down after, I don't know, I can't remember, 20, 30 years. There really isn't anything. There is a Rancocas group of Lenni Lenape who have tried to maintain some presence. It's outside the Pinelands where their headquarters was. I don't think they're very active at the moment. And so there really isn't anything that you could really look to that I know of as a great place to sort of learn about and see what that native culture was like. Yes, sir?
Are there any of the Pinelands adventures that would be suitable for this type of group to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for one thing, we can organize one. Yeah, we can organize one. If you want to do walking, we can do walking. If you want to do paddling, we can do paddling. We have canoes and kayaks, but also there's great places to walk. And I think having a guide is really nice because you'll see things you might not otherwise notice. So I'd love to organize something for this group. That would be great. I live to do that.
It says something here about bus tours. Is there a bus that goes through there?
A bus? No. We don't do public transportation much in South Jersey, as you know. But no, there isn't. There's really no transit at all. It's unfortunate because it obviously limits people's ability to enjoy the place. So we do in the fall. We typically do cranberry tours at a farm in called Moore's Meadow Farm, and I think we'll be able to do that again this year. We were constrained some by the pandemic by how many people, because you have to get into a bus, and then we go around the farm, and the farmer is there, a guy named Sammy Moore, who's a great guy. We will do those in the fall. So if you look at Pinelands Adventures, look on their website. They will be usually in October, which is the cranberry harvest season, when the cranberries, ripen and are harvested. And that's a lot of fun. It's really cool. Yeah.
The recent fires in South Jersey were obviously in the Pinelands.
Yes.
What was the outcome of all that?
That's what I was talking about a little earlier. That So the big one was the 13,000 plus acre fire last week, which has been fully contained and is still going to have some bits and pieces smoking away. But we'll have to see. I think one interesting thing to do would be to organize a walk that includes going, and seeing how the forest is recovering, because it is really interesting to see how rapidly the forest can bounce back from a really intense fire like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We want to make sure give you a record.
Oh, thank you very much.
That includes a year membership. So if you want to get free breakfast, you're welcome.
He's too tall.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, good.
Oh, Carlton. You're supposed to draw the 50-50.
No!
What do you mean no?
Stan already has the newest member ready to do it.
Oh, okay, never mind. It's okay, somebody already picked it.
Did they pick the raffle yet?
That's what they claim. Okay, let's do the raffle.
You just have to pick out one ticket. Okay. Is yours early or late?
Hi, I'm Steve Chasnoff, a pseudo newest member, picking the raffle. The winning number is 185386. Winner is here. That goes Dave from Brooklyn. Let's see your ticket to verify.
386.
Okay, done.
Thanks. That's it. Okay. Okay. All right.
Speaking to the mic.
Sit down. We're back. Bob. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Got a couple minutes. First of all, we have so many new members here, Bert. Guy's 98 years old or something, Bert? Anyway, many people here are unaware of the fact that we are not just the South Jersey Men's Club, we are part of the Middle Atlantic region of the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs, which is having a convention this summer in Philadelphia, no less. Anyway, our next meeting is not going to be here. We're having a barbecue, Randy. The barbecue is going to be at the same place it was last summer, which is at Red Bank, and it's $10 per person. And if you'd like to sign up for it now, Stan Schumas, Stan, you stand for a moment, please. You can see Stan and pay him now. It's $10. The second thing is, some of you are unaware of it, but we have a group of people, like 20 of us, who have been helping at the Jewish Family Service. And we have people here who go, every week we have a team. We switch teams on who goes. Bob Greenberg and Ed Stein, and all the guys who go and work at the food bank. Stand up, please. Stand up, please. Ed Stein, you work at it. Jay, you work at it. Thank you. Also, if you'll notice in the back, we have people who bring books. And what are some of the other things? Toiletries? Glasses, that's right. Some of the glasses go through the Lions Club. Books go to the library here. Toiletries go to Jewish Family Service. Has anybody here ever been to Israel? Yes. Jewish War Veterans has a trip in April. One of our members, Nelson Melitz, is going to be the next national commander of the Jewish War Vets. Yeah. And for their April trip, it's going to also have a side thing where you can volunteer to work on an army base called Volunteers for Israel. And some of us did that in 2018. So there'll be more information about that. And if you'd like to participate, either on the trip that Jewish War Vets is doing or on an army base, there'll be more information in the future. Another thing that we have done in the past is we've had some trips. One of the trips was the Morris River. How many people have been on the Morris River trip? Very nice trip. And we're probably going to try to arrange for that once again. So keep your ears open and look at our website. Thank you.
When is the barbecue?
What's the date of the barbecue? July 31st.
The last Sunday.
Yes, our meetings are almost always, with exceptions, the last Sunday of the month.
Okay, good.
Okay, so again, remember the barbecue is a picnic, I guess. It's going to be 11 o'clock, July 31st. It's going to be $10 per person. We'll send you the information on where to send the money. Now we have an investment club meeting right after this. Just complain to Art, not me, that we lost money. So, any other issues? Okay, thank you very much, guys.